Welcome, and thank you for being here today to experience this leadership and management development element of the Optima program, of which there are several, but today we are going to be focusing on verbal communication. I'm going to be looking at the work of Rackham and Morgan, which was a significant piece of research undertaken between 1968 and 1972, and predominantly within the British Overseas Aircraft Corporation. To cut a very long story short, the investigating team were looking to see if there was a relationship between the quality of leadership and management within the organisation and how people actually verbally communicated. So what I'm going to do today is run you through the process that was known as behavioural analysis, or BA. As the inquiry team investigated, they were asked to look at a broad spectrum of leadership and management candidates. And what they did initially in behavioural analysis was capture the methods by which people verbally communicated. And so today we're going to look at 11 ways in which people verbally communicate, and I will describe each one in turn. First of all, we have proposing. Proposing was defined as anything that verbally communicates a new idea and that is actionable. So for example, I might say to you here today, it's getting a bit warm in here, shall I open a window? New to the conversation, and it has action attached to it. The second one that was defined was supporting. Supporting in this model will only ever follow a proposal. Supporting is any verbal communication that does just that, acknowledges the proposal that has been made and in some way supports it. So for example, having said, it's getting a bit warm in here and shall I open a window, if somebody else were then to say, you're right, it is, I've noticed how it's been getting warmer, then they have acknowledged my words, they have acknowledged the potential for the action to be taken, and therefore they have supported my proposal. The third one on the list is building. Building is any verbal communicating behaviour that might arguably make better any proposal that has been made, which has been supported. So having said, it's getting warm in here, shall I open a window? Somebody else has agreed with me that that is the case, and somebody else might say, well, why don't I open the door as well to create a through draft and bring the temperature down even more quickly? And so there we have a cycle of a proposal being made where it has been supported by another person and the idea has been made even better by a third person. At this point, it is worth saying that proposing and building can both occur within the same verbal communication, so one person can deliver both messages effectively. What I will also say is that these three elements are the only three that are linked in Rackham and Morgan's model of communicating, and the rest can be dealt with and treated individually. Let me explain. The next communicating behaviour that was defined was disagreeing. Now, if I were to say, it's getting warm in here, shall I open a window? And someone else were to say, well, actually, I find it's a bit chilly and it has been all morning, then basically that is a verbal communication that disagrees with my proposal, and that's fine. There is absolutely nothing wrong with disagreeing as a communicating behaviour. The thing we have to be mindful of is it possible that there is too much disagreeing going on in a room or a meeting for it to be useful? And we will look later at what might be useful in the list that we are looking at. So next we look at defend and attack. And by description and definition, this doesn't sound particularly great, and defend and attack might occur where, for example, I make my proposal that it's getting warm in here and maybe we should open a window, and somebody else might say to me, well, that's the trouble with you, you're always complaining about something or another. And what's happened here is that the individual has actually moved away from the subject matter and has now made it a personal slight or a personal attack on me. And so consequently, I invite you to reflect upon the impact that that might have on the recipient of that message. And are there some ego messages going on in there that might usefully be left to one side? The next one we look at is testing understanding. Testing understanding in this model is very much a one-way process. What it is not is me checking out that you have understood me. Testing understanding in Rackham and Morgan's model is about you or me checking out that we have understood other people. Me checking out that I have understood you. You checking out that you have understood another person by perhaps reflecting back to them whatever they have said and testing your understanding of what they have said by reflecting it back to them. And then they can acknowledge and accept whether or not your interpretation of their words is the correct interpretation. Summarising comes next. So summarising works a little bit like this. If we look at the list so far, we have looked at proposing, how that is actionable, and how supporting will only ever follow proposal, and building will only ever follow supporting and or the proposal. We've looked at how disagreeing is a perfectly acceptable method of communication as long as it's not overdone. We have also looked at how defend and attack is where perhaps some ego perspectives are coming into play. So finally, we've got to that place of testing understanding and how that is a one-way communication. And so, in brief, I have just summarised what's happened in the last 5 minutes or so. Summarising can be used in many ways, and we may touch upon that a wee bit later on. Seeking information comes next. And again, this is very much a one-way process. It's where I'm asking questions of you. It's where you're asking questions of other people. And it can be as simple as, have you got the time, please? And the next verbal communicating method is the giving of information. And so if I ask you the time and you respond by telling me it, then you are in fact in that place of giving information. Shutting out comes next. Shutting out is used or occurs when we in some way prevent another person from finishing what they have to say. So we might simply overtalk them. Can you imagine and can you think of the times when you've been in meetings where you haven't been able to finish your sentences because people have overpowered you with their desire to get in over you? And shutting out can manifest itself in several ways. First of all, by simply overtalking somebody. In another way, it can simply be about me saying, oh, and I think that, oh, and sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt, but indeed I did, and I simply carry on without allowing that other person to finish their sentence or whatever it is they were having to say. We will talk some more about this in due course. Bringing in. Bringing in is arguably a very useful method of communicating because actually what you're doing is you're extending an invitation out to other people to become a party to the debate, a party to the dialogue. The beauty of bringing in Rackham and Morgan's model is that invariably it is done by name. You are acknowledging the person, that you know them, you identify with them, you are inviting them to join the debate, and at an unconscious level it provides them with a sense of worth and a sense of value. And so there we have our list. But I want to look at it slightly differently. On the next slide, you will note that I have split those verbal communicating methods into 3 distinct groups. At the top, there is the group in blue, then there is a band in the middle that is green, and at the bottom, there are 2 in red, which are perhaps not entirely useful in our day-to-day language, or if we want to grow ourselves in our leadership style and how we inspire other people. So if we look at giving information, proposing and disagreeing, those are very much verbal communicating methods that will come from me, from that tell style. Equally, in the red at the bottom, the shutting out and the defend attack, they are mainly my ego perspectives. So if I were to take the blue band and the red band together and give you, for example, or an example of how I might be communicating from those 5 elements, it might be something like this. Giving information. Listen up, everybody. I've got things I want to tell you. Proposing. I've got some really fantastic ideas. Disagreeing. Therefore, I can't really agree with anything that you have to say. Shutting out. Well, actually, I'm not listening to you more anyway. And defend attack, because most of your ideas usually turn to dust anyway. And I do exaggerate for effect, of course, but now look at the impact of what might a person experience if I'm communicating with them in the green band. Seeking information. Let me listen to you. Supporting. Let me appreciate you for those really, really good ideas that you're bringing forward. Testing understanding. Just to make sure I am understanding you, if I'm hearing you right, then you are suggesting A, B, C, D, and E. Is that correct? Summarising. Let me just repeat back to the group those good ideas that you have been putting forward. Building. Actually, I can probably think of some things that we can do that will make those ideas of yours even better. Bill, Harry, Samantha. In bringing in, I'm inviting other people by name to contribute to this discussion as well. What I'm doing is letting go of my own ego perspective and letting go of my need to be the person doing all the talking, the telling. We move on. As Rackham and Morgan were exploring communicating behaviours, they made a discovery. They discovered that there seemed to be a splinter group of people within those that they were measuring, that regardless of the conditions in the marketplace, they seemed to be consistently successful. So they decided to take their work a wee bit more deep and just explore those individuals, and not only how they verbally communicate, but the balances within which they communicated. This particular model talks about styles of leadership from an autocratic perspective down to a democratic perspective, and let me describe them. At the tail end of the spectrum, you have the individual leader and manager who is doing just that, telling people how things are going to be. Today we are going to do this, let's just get on with it. A very tell and autocratic style. As we move a little bit more gently down towards democrat, we introduce a sells style. Still largely the ideas of the individual leader and manager being foisted upon the group, but now with a little bit of marketing attached, which might be because we think that if we do this, it's going to give us these outcomes. As we move a little bit more closely down towards the democratic end, we introduce a test style. Again, still largely the ideas of the individual leader and manager with a little bit of marketing attached because we think it's going to give us these outcomes, but now they test the depth of the water slightly by saying to you, what are your thoughts and feelings about that? Now, I may not take any notice of those thoughts and feelings, but I do extend that offer out as I move more gently down towards the democratic end. As we move further towards democratic, then we introduce the consulting style. And in many ways, this is the first time that we actually see the individual leader and manager letting go of the need to have control. And so our conference, our meeting might start with, okay, listen, I've got some ideas for today, but what I'd really like to do is listen to yours first and see whether or not they are aligned to mine in any way, or indeed whether or not there are some that might be even better than my plan. And then finally we get down to that joins style. And it's at this place that an unseen observer in the room might actually not be able to determine who the leader is because that leader has become fully integrated into the group. And the only time that person's authority comes to the fore is when there might be some need to finally make a decision or ultimately apply some form of sanction. Let's just look at this a wee bit more deeply. What was discovered within the Rackham and Morgan investigation was that really good quality leaders and managers at the autocratic end of leadership, even when they're pushing for results, when they're really, really under the cosh, they're really needing to get some results, even in those times of pressure, their communicating behaviour in terms of the language that comes from them and their directiveness seldom exceeds 60% of their verbal communicating behaviour. At the same time, and therefore, 40% of the time, they are in that green band that we discussed. Equally, we notice that at the democratic end of that style, they will often go as high as 60% in that green band of communication, which is about you and the way you think and your ideas, your ability to contribute, your ability to feel empowered within that unit. And then 40% of the time, they might apply that more autocratic style where they are talking from their perspective. So what we're saying, if we look at typically successful behaviours, is that really truly successful leaders and managers understand the nature of the balances that are to be found within this model, and they apply them on a day-to-day basis. What we commonly find, and when we run our verbal communicating exercises and we look at balances of verbal communicating outputs, we normally find that 80% of our time is spent communicating from our own paradigm, from the way we see the world, as opposed to that more democratic extending that relationship to those who we are leading and managing and seeking to influence into that pull style, to pull them along with us rather than pushing at the more autocratic end. I invite you to remove completely from your language those quips and jibes that often come across the room. Someone walks through the door and they might be a few minutes late and they're met with, oh yes, it trusts you to be late, usually is you. Let's dispose of that sort of language, because actually it's an egocentric position that's unhelpful, and it's actually likely to set up the basis of a poor relationship with the individual. And I know we hear people all the time saying, oh, but it's only a joke and you know me. But what we will never understand is what is going on at an unconscious level for the recipient of your ego. So we come to the end of this introduction to Rackham and Morgan's verbal communicating model. Please take it to the next level and read more deeply about it. And then when we come to that face-to-face place, let's have those questions ready, and let's engage in an exercise that demonstrates firsthand how, if we get our communicating verbal behaviours right, then we can make a significant difference to the lives of people who work for us and with us. So for today, thank you very much for tuning in to this video, and we certainly look forward to seeing you face to face very soon.